Welcome! Thank you so much for joining me. So great to have you here. I'm really excited to be doing this mental health series in terms of how hormones influence your mental health, because I'm hoping that I'll be able to answer some questions, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to show you actually how hormones influence you through the month. You know, sad moods, hyperactive moods, angry moods, depressed moods, happy moods, crazy moods, whatever the moods will be. I'm hoping to show you what happens through the month and actually how your hormone balance can influence this. And by doing this, by showing you and making you understand how hormones can influence you, it can actually put the control back in you, and it will help you to evaluate. It will help you to manage your moods, and so you don't feel lost, you don't feel alone, you don't feel crazy, you don't feel like, why do I feel like this? That's my aim in doing this series. I really want to try and deliver the message that there are things you can do. It doesn't necessarily have to be go on medication, antidepressants, anti-anxiety. It doesn't mean that you're a crazy person, you're just naturally a sad person. It can just mean some hormones are out of balance. So I'm really excited to do this series, and we're going to do one each week. And today I'm focusing on your moods and how they're influenced by the cycle, and how your hormones through the cycle influence your neurotransmitters. So I'm going to try and keep it really specific, because I know I go off in tangents and I get told off sometimes. So I'm going to try and keep it really specific. And this is what we're doing today. We're talking about your cycle, the hormones, particularly progesterone and estrogen, and particularly how they influence your main neurotransmitters. So, hi, thanks so much for joining. So for those of you that might not know me, my name is Naomi. I'm a naturopath and nutritionist. And this is part of what I do, helping you understand the connection between your hormones, your health, and your happiness, how your hormones influence all these other aspects of your life, of your body, of your personality, so that you can kind of gain some control back. So let's do this. And if you have any questions, please just pop them below. It's a little bit of a hot box today, and I had to shut the window, and there's no aircon. I had to shut the window because there's a building next door. So I'm, my own personal sauna right now, but hey, I'm used to it. So we're going to focus on some main hormones, and we're going to focus on your cycle. So the average cycle, to start with, the average cycle, the average female cycle is a 28-day cycle. Day 1 is the first day of your bleed, and typically day 1 to day 14 is called the follicular phase. This is the phase when you're bleeding. This is the phase at the start of your cycle. This is the phase where your hormones are at their lowest. Your thyroid hormones might be lower, your metabolic hormones might be lower, your progesterone hormones might be lower, your estrogen, your testosterone, even your cortisol might be lower. Everything's just a little bit lower. You might be feeling foggy, you might be feeling fatigued, you might be feeling cold, some of you might even get constipated. And for some of you, this lower in the metabolic rate just leads to a natural lowering, lessening of a good mood. So just not depression, but just that lower mood, a tendency towards lower mood, because you're feeling foggy, because you're feeling tired, because your hormones are all a little bit lower. So you're just a bit more lethargic, you're just a bit slower, your memory might be slower. And this will lead to maybe low moods, particularly low motivation, particularly if you've got stuff to do, but you can't get motivated because your metabolic rate is just a little bit lower. Now, progesterone and estrogen, estrogen particularly, helps to regulate your endorphins. It helps to regulate your dopamine. It helps to regulate your serotonin. So, for example, if during this period, for many women, even if you're estrogen dominant, for many women during this first couple of weeks of your cycle, day 1 to day 14, prior to ovulation, estrogen can actually drop out, can really drop out. And if it drops out, this leaves you susceptible to having issues with serotonin and dopamine. You might feel foggy, you might feel depressed, you might have memory lapses, you might get headaches and pain. You might have frequent urination, and you might have sleep problems. Now, we know that serotonin is particularly prevalent when it comes to pain. So if we've got lower serotonin, you might get more headaches, you might get more muscle aches, you might get more joint aches. So notice the cycle, notice the pain during your cycle, during your 28-day cycle. Notice these pains, and even if you're not having your period, maybe you're on oral contraceptives, maybe you're post-menopause, and maybe you're just on the Mirena, maybe you're not getting your period, or you're on the IUD, you will still be getting a flow or hormone flow. So you still can track it, you can still track your symptoms and just see what's going on, just to give you an idea if your hormones are influencing your moods, if they're influencing your day-to-day functioning. So that happens at the first 14 days of your cycle. Then generally what should happen on around day 14, you have that spike. You have that spike, and the LH hormone surges, estrogen surges, and you ovulate. For some of you, you might get the ovulation pain. Now, for most of you, you should feel quite good. But for those that have issues with hormones, what might happen on this phase, particularly if you're estrogen dominant, is you then have a tendency to insomnia, you then have a tendency to more pain, you then have a tendency to anxiety, you then have a tendency to heart palpitations, agitation with those around you. Other signs of estrogen dominance, which I know many of you get, many of you might have, these can be heavy painful periods, these can be fibroids, ovarian cysts, weight gain, anxiety, blood clotting, and shorter cycles. Shorter cycles can influence estrogen dominance. So if you've got any issues with estrogen, you're going to find that you're going to be particularly sensitive around that ovulation and post-ovulation. Post-ovulation, we sort of come into that luteal phase. So luteal phase is when estrogen and progesterone are steadily raising together. They're steadily raising together. But here's the problem. There's a disconnect, because for many women, due to stress, they've got lower progesterone levels, and they don't have the progesterone to rise at the same time as estrogen. So instead of them kind of, right, do you know what, I need a board so I can write things down. I'm gonna get a board and see if I can start writing things down so you can see it, so I can do diagrams, because I'm trying to explain this. So from day 14, estrogen and progesterone should rise together. So they should start to peak, and you should feel happy. You know, your body's just ovulated. Either then you go into pregnancy phase, or you don't go into pregnancy phase. So you know that's what will happen. But with that disconnect, you'll have those really severe estrogen dominant symptoms. So you'll have those painful breasts. You might have the anxiety. You might have the heart palpitations. You might have the bloating. You might have the constipation, the water retention. But coupled with that, you'll have the lower progesterone, particularly if you're a stressed person, you're in fight flight, you're running from task to task, you'll have that lower progesterone. And it's the lower progesterone coupled with the higher estrogen in that second hard part of your period that can cause a lot of the physical, emotional, and mental symptoms. So signs of low progesterone can be breast lumps, low thyroid, weight gain, water retention, and then we get into kind of the pain perception issues because of serotonin. We get into the joint aches, fibromyalgia. If you suffer from fibromyalgia, you'll find that it might kind of flare up in that second half of your cycle, along with other pain, and along with anxiety and insomnia. So that's if you've got the lower progesterone. Now, some people do have higher progesterone. It's a small percentage of you, not many of you have the higher progesterone. During that second half of your phase, you're more likely to have very intense fatigue. So very intense fatigue, needing to sleep all the time. Maybe you do have problems with constipation during that second half of your cycle. Now, if you've got lower progesterone, what it's called is it's like a luteal phase deficiency. So that's second half deficiency. And you might be more likely to spot, and you might be more likely to have issues with spotting, and periods sort of stop starting. And that's if you've got that higher progesterone and that lower estrogen. So what happens during these phases and during your period and in terms of your neurotransmitters, depending on where your hormones are and depending on where your cycle is, and whether you've got high estrogen, low estrogen, or high progesterone or low progesterone, most likely you've got an issue with estrogen dominance coupled with that lower progesterone, because that is what a larger number of women have issues with due to stress, due to the environment, due to just being busy, due to not managing stress. Those are the main issues. So the 4 neurotransmitters I just want to highlight today. We've got, and this is really interesting, when I started doing a bit more research, because I always like to look at studies, and doing these Facebook Lives actually enables me to just look at the newest research that's out there. It gives me this time to do that, so it's a good excuse to do that. And when we look at the 4 neurotransmitters I want to talk about today, if we look at GABA, GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So what GABA does, so it's inhibitory, so GABA relaxes you, it calms you down, helps you to sleep. Now, here's the thing. Estrogen will inhibit, progesterone potentiates. So GABA, we've got this beautiful inhibitory neurotransmitter. So depending on your hormone cycle, if you've got high estrogen, that's going to inhibit GABA, and you're going to get signs of anxiety, you're going to get heart palpitations, irritability, running from task to task, inability to cope, you might even get teary. So that's GABA. So if you're estrogen dominant, plus you've got that low progesterone, you're going to have issues with the GABA neurotransmitter, which is inhibitory. Now, the next really interesting fact is, and this is why, this is for those of you that find through your cycle you have these mood issues. There's another neurotransmitter called glutamate. Now, you may recognize that. Glutamate is naturally found in some fermented foods. It's found in tomatoes. What else is it found in? It's MSG, so it's in MSG. Now, I don't know about you, but I do react to MSG. Now, this would explain, GABA is an excitatory. So GABA wakes you up. Too much of it gives you jitters, it gives you heart palpitations. But this would explain why some of you react to foods mid-cycle and not other times. So you may find you'll have some foods and they'll make you feel anxious, you'll react to it, but you'll have it another time and it'll be fine. The reason being is estrogen potentiates glutamate. Glutamate being an excitatory neurotransmitter, glutamate found in MSG. So if you're pregnant, or if you're mid-cycle, if you're ovulating, if you've got estrogen dominance and you add more glutamate into your diet like MSG, you are going to have more effect. It's going to affect you more. And it might affect you more than if you had it on the first day of your period. So you might have some MSG in a Thai meal or a Chinese meal on day 1 of your cycle and you're fine. You might have MSG in a Thai meal on, say, day 14 of your cycle and you get anxious, you get hot flushes, you get sweaty, you get rashes, and you just get jittery. So this explains cyclic symptoms, and this explains why it's really hard for you to pinpoint what's going on, because the lack of understanding with how the hormones can influence you through a month, 2 weeks, let alone through your life cycle, that it changes. You know, it's so up and down. But if you're estrogen dominant and you have foods that are high in glutamate, it's going to leave you feeling anxious. It's going to leave you feeling jittery. So understanding your hormones is going to help you to understand your symptoms and what is going on. So we've got GABA that's inhibitory. We've got glutamate. So GABA is suppressed by estrogen and it's potentiated by progesterone. So if you've got low progesterone and high estrogen during that second half of your cycle, you're going to be craving foods, carbohydrates, you're going to be feeling anxious. And the same with glutamate. Progesterone suppresses and estrogen excites. I'm moving my hands around, that's why I'm moving like this. It's the way I need to keep them still. So you can see if you've got issues with progesterone and estrogen, you're going to have these issues with GABA and glutamate, and you need to stay away from high glutamate foods. And I'm going to do a blog post on high glutamate foods, because I'm going to show you what foods actually through certain parts of your cycle you should stay away from if you are estrogen dominant. So Jan, so this is the thing about menopause, and this is a misconception. Even during menopause, we can be estrogen dominant. Even if you're not having a period, you can still be making estrogen. You can still be making estrogen in your adrenals. You can still be making estrogen in tissue in your body. So don't for 1 minute just think that because you're postmenopausal, you're not going to be getting these symptoms. You will, particularly if you're estrogen dominant. And I see now a lot of postmenopausal women. I test their hormones and their estrogens are all through the roof. So it's good to know that as well. That that I do see some women with low estrogen, but not too many women. You know, it's mainly elevations these days. The next hormone I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to talk about symptoms here. I actually wrote down all the symptoms, and then I'll get to the estrogen symptoms in a minute. But let's talk about serotonin for a minute, because I see, so what your cycle does for a lot of women, what it can do, it can actually magnify what can actually look like kind of bipolar symptoms, but it's the hormones and the cycle. And what was an aha moment for me this morning was when I was talking to a client yesterday about her symptoms, and she was saying how she'll go from feeling so high, really, really happy, really, really high, so much energy, wants to get out there and just do everything, and then can just suddenly, bam, the next day, bam, it's gone. This is a 28-day cycle. This is like a shift in energy that happens so radically, happens so suddenly that we're not prepared for it, and that's where we can get a lot of issues, because we're really not prepared for these drops. So what can happen with serotonin? Again, estrogen and progesterone modulate. So estrogen modulates serotonin, helps us to use it, make sure there's not too much, make sure there's not too little. So if you've got estrogen out, it's going to be a bit crazy. Progesterone potentiates. So let's talk about that second half of your cycle, just after ovulation, just before your period, when you should have high progesterone. If your progesterone is low, okay, here are some of the symptoms you may be experiencing. I had to write these down because I can't remember everything. These are low serotonin symptoms. You may recognize them from that later half of your cycle, just before your period. Obsessing about things, mentally obsessing about things, mind chatter, being compulsive about things, more compulsive about things. Here's something I've noticed, I've picked up. You know how sometimes you go through phases where you think, have I locked the door? Have I locked the door? You go back and you check the door. That doesn't happen every day. It only happens sometimes, which goes to show that it could be that time in your cycle when your serotonin is lower. Your mood is lower when your serotonin is lower. Sleep disturbances. You might crave sweet, starchy, carbohydrate foods. Your food cravings and your appetite increases tremendously. You need to be eating all the time. You feel like you're not satisfied. You eat. Digestive issues. We know that low serotonin causes constipation, so you might be more low progesterone, then you might be more prevalent for constipation. Just not feeling joy in things. Just not feeling joy in things, and that sense of overwhelm. So think about your cycle and think about, do you feel those symptoms? Not all the time, but it's always at a certain time in your cycle. Those are your low serotonin symptoms. Definitely. Anna, so Anna's asked about heart palpitations that can last for days. Can they be caused from high estrogen? High estrogen can cause heart palpitations, but also low iron. So just be aware of that. Low iron is a biggie when it comes to heart palpitations. So always get your iron checked and just double check as well, Anna. So let's talk about high serotonin. So estrogen modulates serotonin. So if you're estrogen dominant, you might actually get high serotonin symptoms. Okay, so do you recognize any of these? Shivering, pins, you know, you get goosebumps. I've got a client that gets goosebumps, ooh, and shivers, you know, like, those kind of, do you know what I'm saying? Muscle stiffness. I get muscle stiffness. This is really interesting. I get muscle stiffness. When do I get it? A certain time in my cycle. I'm going to have to note that down, actually. Confusion. You know what? I get confusion sometimes. Sometimes I'll drive somewhere and I don't know where I'm going. Restlessness. Agitation, rapid heart rate, there we go, Anna, rapid heart rate, sweating a lot, loss of coordination. I break a glass a month. I break one glass a month because I'm so clumsy, and twitching muscles. They're all low serotonin levels, low serotonin, okay? Now, low serotonin, estrogen modulates serotonin. So if your estrogen is going cuckoo, you might get those high serotonin symptoms. So that's high serotonin versus low serotonin. So think of those symptoms through your cycle. I hope that makes sense. I got a little bit excited because I could, my mind was going blah, 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 blah. Okay, so next, dopamine. So we've talked about GABA, which is inhibitory. We've talked about glutamate, which is excitatory and found in MSG, and how you may only be sensitive to it sometimes. And then we've talked about serotonin, how estrogen modulates serotonin and progesterone potentiates serotonin, causes more of it to work. So if you've got high progesterone as well, you need to watch out for those serotonin issues. Now let's talk about dopamine, because dopamine is a biggie. And I see dopamine fluctuating in people so many times. Dopamine helps with your motivation, it helps with your memory, helps with your libido, it gives you that va-va-va-voom. Estrogen aids dopamine and progesterone modulates. So you see it's slightly different. Estrogen will potentiate dopamine, will help dopamine work. Progesterone will modulate dopamine. Here are some signs, and I want you to think about these. Signs of low dopamine. So you'll have low dopamine, particularly if you've got very low estrogen, high estrogen, sorry, and particularly if you've got low progesterone. So we've got fatigue, lots of fatigue, lack of motivation. I particularly know that lack of motivation in my cycle. It will come just before my period, definitely that week before my period. Not being able to experience pleasure, insomnia, hard to get going in the morning, mood swings, forgetfulness, inability to connect with others, low libido, also caffeine cravings. So if your dopamine is low, you're going to be wanting more caffeine, more stimulants, and you might notice a symptom when you get home at night, you're craving alcohol. So watch your cycle as well. Sometimes in your cycle you might not crave alcohol, and other times you're craving alcohol. Inability to handle stress and stubborn weight. If you've got low dopamine, it's almost impossible to lose weight. It's really difficult to lose weight. High dopamine will happen. High dopamine will happen when you've got low progesterone. So if you've got low progesterone, or your progesterone drops out in your cycle, particularly that 2 weeks before your period, you may have some of these symptoms. So high dopamine symptoms: burning mouth, burning tongue. That's a really interesting symptom because not everyone gets that symptom. Aggression, irritability, anger towards people. Hyperactivity and mania, also a really interesting symptom. Inability to sit still, and a really interesting symptom. Do you know those people that kind of sit in funny positions? They get themselves in funny positions. That's an interesting sign, and that's that high dopamine due to low progesterone. Nausea and vomiting due to low progesterone. Another interesting one, hiccups. High dopamine can cause hiccups. So I know some of my clients get hiccups. That's a really interesting one. Muscle twitching and paranoia. So here's something I've noticed about clients that will happen in their cycle. Actually, being a little bit. Is that Emily, the low dopamine? Okay, so low dopamine, the fatigue, the mood swings, forgetfulness, low libido, sugar cravings, caffeine cravings, those ones. So the low dopamine, so it'll be interesting when you get that. The low dopamine might be due to estrogen dominance. It depends where in your cycle you're getting the remainder of those symptoms. Here's another thing I've noticed with clients of mine through their cycle. They get paranoid about their partners, more insecure, paranoid about where they are, what they're doing, but it only happens certain times in their cycle. Anna asks, and what happens with the 20-year-old girls with PCOS that have all these symptoms of estrogen progesterone imbalances? Is there anything they can do with these symptoms? Yeah, I mean, definitely, Anna, with PCOS, it's a really difficult one. Emily just saw that. Okay, so with PCOS, normally there's some blood sugar problems, so you need to work on the diet first to regulate your blood sugar, and then normally you've got issues with hormones. So either with PCOS, you've got elevated testosterone or you've got elevated estrogen. So if you've got elevated testosterone, you get the hair growth, you get the acne on the back, you might get some acne on the neck here, you might get body odor, sweating, anger, irritability, craving sweets, that kind of thing, and a longer cycle or no period at all with PCOS, especially if it's estrogen dominant. If you're polycystic ovarian syndrome and you're testosterone dominant, estrogen dominant's a shorter cycle, Anna. If you're testosterone dominant, that's a longer cycle, no period at all, scanty periods, mid-cycle pain. You might get a different type of acne. So I think I just misexplained that. I've just got a feeling I misexplained that, Anna. So I'm actually going to say that again because I've just got a feeling I've confused you. With polycystic ovarian syndrome, because I was talking too fast, it can be estrogen dominant or testosterone dominant. Estrogen dominant PCOS is shorter cycles, heavy, painful bleeding. You've still got the insulin resistant, you've still got the issues with sugar, and polycystic ovarian syndrome, you get more acne here on the side of the face, the jawline, and you might have other estrogen dominant symptoms. If it's testosterone driven, there will be no period, a longer period, scanty periods, spotting, and mid-cycle pain. Anna, so the aim is first to work on your insulin, balance out your blood sugar, and then work at balancing the hormones by cleansing the liver, working on the gut. Those are the areas to work on. But it really depends which hormone is the driver there in terms of the polycystic ovarian syndrome, because there's a lot at play. So Emily's asked, Emily said, that's me the past week, my period's about to start. So Emily, that if it's you the last week and your period's about to start, you're in that luteal phase. So you've gone through, so you're in that luteal phase. So it sounds to me, I can't remember what symptoms you said, was it it sounds to me there might be a drop in progesterone during your second half of your cycle then. That's what it sounds to me. But definitely, there's definitely some more you can do in terms of figuring out whether it's that drop in progesterone. So those are all the neurotransmitters we've talked about, and we talked about GABA. Emily, have you been anxious as well? Heart palpitations and insomnia. Have those been the symptoms you've been getting? Look, the longer I sit here, my hair gets frizzier and frizzier because of this heat. Yeah, Emily, let me know if you've been getting those anxiety kind of symptoms and insomnia symptoms, because that would be interesting as well. So the first thing to understanding what's going on in your cycle is to track your symptoms. I'm not just talking about heavy, painful periods. I'm talking about these emotional symptoms as well. Tracking your appetite, tracking, are you angry? Are you sad? Are you more sensitive to alcohol? Are you more sensitive to certain foods? Are you not sleeping? Are you getting leg cramps? Really tracking it, that's a really great way, because then you can start to identify symptoms that aren't day-to-day symptoms. They're really related to your hormones and your neurotransmitters. You can test. There are some great tests available to you from holistic GPs, naturopaths like myself, online tests. You know, there's saliva hormone testing, there's the Dutch test, there's a urine test. The Dutch test is amazing because it will show you all your neurotransmitters, it will show you what all the hormones are doing and the metabolites once the hormones are working in your body. So testing is available if that's where you want to go. General hormone balancing is about balancing your diet. You know, balancing your 3 meals a day to regulate the hormones, regulate your leptin, regulate your blood sugar. And that's going to go a long way to helping your neurotransmitters and to helping your mood as well. And then also continually daily to reset your nervous system. You know, things like meditation, things like grounding, things like meditation. I said yin yoga, just doing, really resetting. Don't push every day. Resetting helps to balance out your hormones. And then cleansing. Cleansing is one of the best ways to help with hormones. You know, if you know you've got elevated estrogen, and signs of elevated estrogen can be fibroids, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, acne, hair loss, low thyroid, heavy painful bleeding, spotting, short cycles, you know, all of those are signs of elevated estrogen. Cleansing is one of the best ways to reset estrogen, and the best supplement I found so far is calcium D-glucarate. Really helps to remove those estrogens from your body and balance out elevated hormones. So I love those. And of course, with low progesterone, it can be more difficult to reset progesterone. Low progesterone symptoms that we've talked about, they're those low serotonin. It's the fatigue, it's the bloating, it's the water retention, it's the insomnia, the anxiety, the agitation, the heart palpitations, breast lumps, painful breasts, all of those kind of things included with the low serotonin. So the low serotonin symptoms, you know, compulsiveness, depressed mood, sweet starchy cravings, low libido. They're all the low progesterone symptoms as well. Not feeling joy. So things that can help with that, some people like St. John's wort, regulating your melatonin, so making sure you sleep in a dark room, wearing blue light blocker glasses. 5-HTP can work for some people. It's quite, you know, that can help. St. John's wort I've seen help people with MTHFR that are sensitive and have low serotonin. Vitex is a great herb to stimulate the pituitary to make serotonin. B6 is wonderful. Fats in your food, meditation, candle gazing, all those things are lovely. I've talked about all this in another video previously in terms of helping those. But this was today, so this was talking about your cycle. It was talking about how your cycle affects GABA, glutamate, serotonin and dopamine, and how progesterone and estrogen influence those 4 neurotransmitters. So I hope you found that helpful. That was really fun. I actually really enjoyed doing that one. Let's have a look. Sorry, I've missed a lot. Yeah, I mean, you can book in with a naturopath like myself. You can book in with a holistic GP. There are lots of can't think. So confused and anxious. So definitely. So when you're in that state, Emily, of being that anxious and agitation, you know what is actually good to do. And I know that you're doing the breakthrough diet. Add a little bit more carbohydrate to your diet. Make sure you have your breakfast, your lunch and dinner, and maybe have for breakfast or a little snack mid-morning, have a chia pudding or have that grain-free birch muesli. That helps to just stabilize the serotonin levels as well. It helps. It's that little bit of extra carb, not much, but a little bit extra. Do that and make sure you're focusing on resting and restoring, Emily. So during these 2 weeks of your cycle, you need to be going out and you need to be grounding for 10 minutes a day outside on the earth. That's number one, and that's really important. Making sure you're having a little bit of more carbohydrate this time in your cycle, you know, the birch-free muesli or chia pudding or something like that for mid-morning. And grounding, and then doing meditation. So doing a couple of minutes of meditation. It's really important that you do this. And then also try and have some more downtime at night time, this time in your cycle. And that's going to help you, Emily, to reset those hormones as well, especially if you're really feeling confused, really feeling anxious. Tiffany asked, I was just going to ask about my mid-cycle pain. I often get pain, which is when I think I'm ovulating. My skin is also breaking out horribly in the last couple of months. So Tiffany, mid-cycle pain is normally due to elevated testosterone. So elevated testosterone will cause some form of acne. Sometimes it's on the back, sometimes it's kind of like on the cheeks here. Sometimes you might also get some hair growth. Sometimes you might have longer cycles, you know, 35 days, and then the mid-cycle pain. So it's normally testosterone driven. So you need to be really careful with really high fat diets. Be really careful with coconut oil and MCT oil because they can raise your testosterone. Make sure that you're really looking after your nervous system and managing your blood sugar as well. So making sure you're not having too much sugar, not too much refined carbohydrate, and that will slowly help. Working on your nervous system and working your diet will slowly help to balance out your testosterone levels as well. Be careful with maca powder because that can elevate testosterone a little bit too high. Okay. Should we have, Kirsty asked, should we have high fat? So a high fat diet is a really great high fat diet, is a good diet to have, but sometimes it doesn't suit people. Okay, if you're really, really estrogen dominant and you go cray on the fats, like really high fat, it can be feeding your estrogen if you haven't dealt with your gallbladder and you haven't dealt with your liver and you haven't dealt with your digestion. So you need to know you've got a healthy digestive system before you go super high in fats. Another thing with a high fat diet, it can increase testosterone levels. So if you've got polycystic ovarian syndrome or you've got really elevated testosterone, you just need to be careful. Other than that, Kirsty, a high fat diet can be good. I fluctuate between a high and low fat diet, and it changes my hormone makeup almost instantly. So within a couple of weeks of a high fat diet and a couple of weeks of doing more coconut oil and MCT oil, my testosterone is up. I can notice it, but then I go back a little bit. I've got more energy, my muscle growth is better, but you know, I don't want to have really high testosterone. So I would just thanks, Emily. Yeah, doing the breakthrough cleanse would definitely help. Oh, you're sweet. Thank you. Oh, funny. But yeah, so that's with the fats. I mean, I love high fats just for general health, but you just need to be aware of what it can cause. Thank you so much, Emily. So I hope you found that helpful. I'm going to be doing this each week on a different subject in terms of hormones. Next week I'll focus in on anxiety. I'm also going to do one on postnatal depression as well, and a few other areas of health in terms of your mental health. So I'm looking forward to that next week. So I can't wait to have you join me. If you've got any questions, please hit me up. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks guys for joining. Thanks Emily for the shout out. Really appreciate that. You're sweet. Have a great day guys. Bye. Enjoy the heat.